Hello everyone, welcome to the fire weather briefing for Eastern Area for the week of April 29th. Eastern Area moved to a PL2 yesterday, nationally holding it 2 with Southern Area at a PL4 and Southwest at PL2. So a lot of activity just south of our GAC, but not too bad in our area. Let's take a look at what's going on. Okay, for temperature trends, you've seen the upper left graphic for quite a while with the very warm area over the southern part of Eastern Area. And for the last month, we see a very similar trend for April with the Ohio Valley having temperatures 7 to 10 degrees above normal and then approaching normal as you get farther to the north, both in the Northeast and over the Great Lakes states, and in the northwest corner of Minnesota, actually a little bit below normal. For precipitation, again, we've seen the March graphic quite a bit, but the April one continues to morph a little bit. We did see that the last couple of weeks of heavier showers and thunderstorms throughout the Midwest has caused a well above normal pattern from Missouri over into the Great Lakes states. Notice that the western side of Minnesota and even down into the northwest corner of Iowa is on the drier side. And then in New England, we see that much of Massachusetts and all points south down towards the mid-Atlantic and along the southern portion of the Ohio River Valley are all quite a bit drier than normal for this time of year. And then for our observed precip in the last week, you can see that that pattern is pretty similar over the Midwest with the heavier rains over Missouri and on over into the Ohio Valley. But despite some of that heavier rain in southern Indiana and Illinois, overall, it just has not been a very wet month there. And then for the last week, much of New England has stayed on the dry side, including northern New York. Down around the mid-Atlantic, there's been kind of a mixed bag, but these light green areas aren't really much precipitation, especially considering that there is some longer-term drought lurking down there. For warnings, watches, and advisories, not much going on today. A few areas of flooding and then breezy conditions along the west coast. I do want to advise you that this doesn't show up on here, but much of northern Vermont has concern out for high fire danger today, although it wasn't quite to warning or watch stage. For today, you can see that for maximum temperatures, it's a bit cooler out there today with mostly 50s and 60s across the landscape. Relative humidities are driest over in Minnesota, reaching down into Wisconsin, eastern Iowa, and even northern Illinois. There's also this sliver over Vermont, maybe over into New York a little bit, that's on the drier side. And this lines up with where our significant fire potential is for today, both in the west and in the northeast. There are these breezy conditions expected across Minnesota today and reaching down towards Illinois. That's going to help to dry out fuels, but with recent rains in Illinois, that won't be a big player there. It may help to dry out fuels a little bit more in Minnesota, coming back from the recent rains, both there and in Wisconsin. For 24-hour precipitation, the main band of moisture has now shifted over to the western part of New York and Pennsylvania, down into West Virginia, and then that's going to continue to shift to the east later tonight. So the eastern half of our area of interest is going to get pretty wet. Now moving on to Thursday, we see the cool air continues to hold in place. Relative humidities dry out a little bit more in the west, and there is a drying trend coming in behind that frontal passage, even getting into Pennsylvania and the mid-Atlantic for tomorrow. Now, wind's going to continue to be a little bit breezy out in the west. You can see over in the east, we also have some gustier conditions expected as this front moves through. But since it's damper, concern is just not very big there. So we've just got a few areas to key in on for tomorrow of western Minnesota and over into southern Wisconsin, and then down in parts of Pennsylvania and into the mid-Atlantic. Again, this is kind of borderline that there's really any concern, but a little bit elevated for tomorrow. On Friday, another fairly low-key day. We see relative humidities throughout much of the west continuing to drop, though winds have also dropped for the most part across that area. And then in the east, there are some areas with a little bit of a higher concern revolving around humidities, but for the most part, a little moisture has come through, and there is still the chance for a few showers into the day tomorrow. So dropping concerns for most of the northeast. Confidence in the medium range is pretty good overall. Behind this frontal system, there is high pressure trying to move in, and it does set up for a much drier air mass, although temperatures remain cool through the weekend. The next frontal system tries to come into the Great Lakes states as we get to Sunday, but there's really not much moisture associated with that. And even into early next week, this big area of green makes it look wet, but in fact, there's not much more expected than a few showers across the landscape. Overall, this will be a pretty dry period for most of the region, and as the weekend progresses, we'll see a bigger and bigger swath of concern across eastern area. By Tuesday, we might see enough moisture coming in with some of these fronts to drop concern a little bit, but it looks like it could be a busy weekend with a big focus once again over in Minnesota. As we get into the beyond 1 week outlook, you can see that colder than normal temperatures are likely across much of the region, and drier than normal weather is expected to hold over the Midwest, and specifically targeting over Minnesota. Towards the east, it might be a little bit wetter than normal, especially up towards Maine, but it's going to take a substantial period of rain in order to bring some of the drought concerns down there. The extended outlook for the rest of May brings equal chances for warm, cold, or normal temperatures across most of eastern area. Overall, pretty much equal chances for any state of precipitation. For precipitation over the last week, we can see that there was heavier rain farther to the south, again over the Ohio Valley, but still not really enough to knock down the drier fuels there. Minnesota did have some rain with more of a focus in the east. It's still pretty dry, especially up in the northwest corner. And then over in New England, it was a pretty dry week overall. The next 7 days look like we're going to continue to see more rain in the east than in the west. And Minnesota in particular looks to be quite dry for this 7-day period. For the Great Lakes Fire and Fuel sites, the next 4 days don't show anything particularly exciting. However, this area in the north and western corner of Minnesota does expand on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday to be in the very high range for much of the western half of the state. Again, this is initial spread index, so we're talking about the potential for rapid spread on any existing fires. Looking a little harder at fuels, we can see that our ERC map has really toned things down for West Virginia and southern Illinois and Ohio, where it had been higher. There's now a greater focus up in northern New York and even over into Vermont and New Hampshire. We also see an uptick trend in the forecast for Minnesota and a good chunk of the Great Lakes states. The drought monitor shows kind of a continuation of these dry conditions in Minnesota. More enhancement of the driest concern down in the far southern reaches of Illinois and Missouri. And along the southern side of the Ohio Valley, it's pretty dry. Over into West Virginia, it's been quite a period of drought all the way out to the mid-Atlantic, and then again up into the northeast. For green vegetation fraction, we can see a lot of green out here now through Missouri and over into parts of the Ohio Valley. Even up in the northeast, these colors have changed quite a bit in the last week, so we're definitely seeing green up happening. It's just not going to happen that quickly. And of course, continuing to note these brown colors holding over Minnesota and down into part of Iowa, where green up is just not happening very quickly. The Fuels and Fire Behavior Advisory continues to hold for most of southern area, but reaching up a little bit into West Virginia, the southern part of Ohio, and also over into Maryland. Again, this may indicate that even though fuels are green, fire can still spread rapidly, especially on a hot and dry day. In summary, we've got some fire danger over Minnesota today, but the bigger focus is in northern New York and New England, with a little bit of wind and at least a week-long period with no precipitation there. Now, fire potential is going to stay fairly low for the rest of the work week. There's a little bit of concern over Minnesota in the west, and that area then grows and elevates by the weekend, with a big chunk of the region here in the graphic on Sunday showing as very high and a high burn environment over in Minnesota. And that's because of the downed fuels that are there, the long-term drought, the fact that green up is happening slowly, and that we're going to continue to have dry and breezy weather at times. For the eastern half of the region, after today, things tone down there as we get into the weekend, and then activity picks up once again, holding through Monday until a little bit of showery weather enters the regime on Tuesday to dampen things there once again. We are definitely in the heart of Eastern Area's fire season, and we'll continue to see some busy days out there. Check out the 7-Day to see our updates. And in the meantime, thanks for listening and have a great week.